never imagined that the most painful part of losing my mother would not be her absence, but what followed afterward. When she passed, she left me a sum of money. Not extravagant wealth, but enough to be a cushion, a lifeline. I placed it carefully into a separate account. To me, it wasn't just money. It was a piece of her legacy, a reminder of every sacrifice she had made to keep our family afloat. But here's the twist. That account became less of a comfort and more of a shadow in my marriage. Why? Because my husband Daniel wouldn't stop circling it like a vulture. He didn't see the account as sacred. He saw it as opportunity. And with each passing day, I realized he wanted that inheritance to benefit not us as a couple, but everyone else, especially his family. The first time he mentioned it, I brushed it off. He casually said, "We could finally redo the kitchen with your inheritance." A harmless suggestion, right? But then it was the car. Then the vacations. Then the bills. Each time, the word "your" in "your inheritance" felt like a needle. Every time he spoke of it, I heard the same thing. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking me to spend my mother's memory. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. He didn't just want me to spend it. He started expecting me to. Suddenly, groceries were on me. The electric bill? Me again? Dinner out with friends? He'd pat his pockets and say he'd forgotten his card. Each small moment seemed forgivable in isolation, but strung together, they created a very clear picture. Now, you might wonder, why didn't I speak up? The truth is, I kept telling myself it was temporary. Maybe he was adjusting. Maybe grief was clouding my judgment, making me oversensitive. But deep down, I knew better. I knew he was setting a precedent, that my inheritance was no longer mine, but ours. Or worse, theirs. And that's where New Year's Eve came in. The night that ripped the veil off everything I had been ignoring. Because while I thought Daniel was quietly leaning on me, I hadn't yet realized how entitled his family felt to what wasn't theirs. That night, in a restaurant surrounded by his parents, his siblings, and a room full of strangers, I discovered just how far they were willing to go. It started with laughter. It ended with me walking out, but the space in between, that's where the real betrayal sat waiting, like a snake ready to strike. When I look back now, I can see the shift so clearly. It didn't happen all at once. It started small, almost invisible, the way a crack appears in glass. It started small. Daniel forgetting his wallet, smirking as he joked, "Don't worry, babe, you've got it covered with the inheritance." A joke, but not the kind you laugh at. More like the kind that makes your stomach knot. Alone, forgivable. Together, a pattern. Then came the subtle patterns. Groceries? Always me. Gas for the car? Me again. The bills that had once been split evenly were now being quietly slid onto my plate, as though invisible hands were moving chess pieces when I wasn't looking. And yet, I kept convincing myself to be patient. Maybe he was just going through a phase. Maybe the stress of the holidays. Maybe his job. And every time I stayed quiet, the water rose higher, preparing me for the night I would finally stop swimming. What unsettled me most was how often he brought up ideas for the money. Renovations, luxury vacations, investments in his brother's business, as though the inheritance were a community chest waiting to be drawn from. Each suggestion chipped away at my silence, and each time I bit my tongue, I lost a little more ground. The more I said nothing, the bolder he became. And isn't that how entitlement always grows? It never asks for permission. It waits for your silence. There was one night that still lingers in my mind. We were sitting in the living room, the TV murmuring in the background, when he casually said, Mom was saying you should use some of that money to help us all out. After all, family shares, right? That word, shares. It was like hearing the ground shift beneath my feet. This wasn't about partnership anymore. It was about ownership. And the truth hit me. My grief had turned into their opportunity. I could have spoken then. I could have drawn the line. But instead, I smiled tightly, changed the subject, and swallowed the lump in my throat. Why? Because I was afraid. Afraid that standing up for myself would make me the villain in a family where they already treated me like an outsider. But here's the thing that pulled me in. I kept wondering if silence was the safer choice. Would they accuse me of being greedy? Cold? Would Daniel resent me if I drew boundaries too firmly? Still, I felt the storm building, and with each passing day, I knew it was only a matter of time before my silence would no longer protect me. It would betray me. The night of New Year's Eve was approaching. I thought it would be simple. A dinner, some laughter, a toast at midnight. But what I didn't realize was that Daniel and his family weren't going there to celebrate. They were going there to collect. And that's the moment that changes everything. Because when the bill came, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a test, one that revealed how little they valued me and how much they valued what I had lost. It happened in a flash, but the echo of it still lingers in my chest. The waiter had just cleared the last of the plates. Everyone was full, cheeks flushed from wine and laughter. For a moment, there was a hush across the table, the kind of pause that always comes right before the bill arrives. And then Daniel's mother leaned back in her chair, smirk curling on her lips, and said the words that would change the night. "Well, I guess this one's on your inheritance pocket, right?" The table erupted. His sister chuckled. His father slapped the table as though it were the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Even Daniel grinned, nodding along as though it were the most natural assumption in the world. But me? I froze. It isn't just the words. It was the tone. She didn't ask. She didn't wonder. She assumed. She spoke as though my money, the money tied to my mother's memory, already belonged to all of them. The way the laughter carried, building around me like a storm, daring me to join in. It wasn't just a joke. It was a test. Would I object? Would I draw a line? Or would I do what they expected? Smile politely, take out my card, and foot the bill for 10 people as though it were nothing? I felt heat rise up my neck, but I kept my face still, silent, expressionless. Because here's the truth. That night, silence was my shield. I could feel Daniel watching me, waiting for my reaction. He didn't look worried. He looked confident, as if he knew I would cave. As if this had already been discussed behind my back, rehearsed even. And that realization cut deeper than his mother's words. Because in that moment, it hit me. Daniel wasn't just complicit. He was the one who had set the stage. My mind went back to all the little comments, the forgetting his wallet, the nudges about helping his family, the quiet expectation that I'd be the provider. It all came together in a single sickening click. He had been grooming me for this, conditioning me to pay, and now, surrounded by his family, he thought I wouldn't dare resist. I lifted my glass of water, holding it steady to stop my hand from shaking. My heart was pounding, but my face betrayed nothing. They thought they were laughing at me, but really, I was studying them. Every smirk, every expectant glance, every unspoken word that screamed, "You owe us." The bill arrived. The waiter placed it in the center of the table, and suddenly all eyes shifted toward me. No one reached for it. No one even pretended to. They just waited, like vultures circling, confident Their prey had no way out. And here's the twist. I reached into my bag, pulled out my wallet, and placed my card neatly on the table. But instead of sliding it toward the bill, I tucked it back under my plate. Then, without a word, I excused myself, stood up, and walked away. The clink of cutlery froze mid-air. Chairs stopped, halfway pushed back. The restaurant buzz went on around us, but at that table, the silence pressed so hard against my chest, I thought I could hear my own pulse. Then the shouting started. My name echoing across the restaurant, chairs scraping as Daniel tried to chase me. His family calling after me, their voices sharp with disbelief. But I didn't turn back. Each step I took toward the door was a declaration. I am not your bank. I am not your provider. I am not your fool. When the cold night air hit my face, it felt like freedom. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I could breathe. They thought they had humiliated me, but in reality, I had humiliated them, not with words, but with silence. That night, silence was my shield. But in the weeks to come, it would become something else entirely. The blade I would carry, waiting for the right moment to cut. The moment I stepped into the night, I felt the cold slice against my skin like a warning. Behind me, voices were still shouting, echoing from the restaurant doorway, but I kept walking. Each footstep was deliberate, steady, calm. I wasn't running away. I was walking out on a stage I never agreed to be part of. What they didn't see is that silence is rarely empty. It waits. It sharpens. It prepares for the moment when it cuts deepest. It unsettles. It disarms. It forces others to sit with their own behavior. I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and for a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My heart was racing, my palms damp. I could have gone back inside. I could have taken the easy road, handed over my card, and bought my way out of conflict. But I knew that if I did, it wouldn't just be one dinner. It would be every dinner, every holiday, every moment of my life until that account was dry. So I turned the key and drove home. The streets were nearly empty, fireworks already beginning to burst overhead in anticipation of midnight. As I drove, I felt the strangest mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear, because I knew Daniel wouldn't let this go quietly. Exhilaration, because for once I had chosen myself. Walking out wasn't about the money. It was about boundaries, about reminding myself that what belonged to me didn't suddenly become communal property the moment someone else felt entitled to it. By the time I reached the house, the silence inside was almost comforting. I changed into pajamas, made myself a cup of tea, and curled into bed. It felt strange, lying there alone on New Year's Eve, but also liberating. The noise, the laughter, the manipulation, I had left it all behind at that restaurant table. But I knew the night wasn't over. Daniel wasn't the type to let humiliation slide, especially not in front of his family. And when he finally came home, hours later, he would confirm everything I already knew. The clock ticked past midnight. Fireworks exploded outside, colors splintering against the dark sky. Somewhere across town, people were celebrating, cheering for new beginnings. Meanwhile, I lay awake, waiting for the sound of the front door. And sure enough, just after 3 a.m, it came. The door slammed. Heavy footsteps pounded through the hallway. Then his voice, sharp and angry, slicing through the quiet. "What the hell was that?" "Pathetic," he spat. "That's what you are." Pathetic. The word hit the air, sharp and wet, spit flying with every syllable. Humiliation, he hissed. That's what you gave me. You humiliated me. You humiliated them. You shamed this family tonight. His voice cracked under the weight of his fury, breaking like glass. His rage wasn't about dinner. It was about exposure. And the moment I slipped out of that restaurant, he realized he no longer had control. I sat up slowly, keeping my voice calm, my expression unreadable. I let him shout, let him spill every accusation, every twisted version of events, because silence isn't just walking away. Sometimes it's refusing to fuel the fire. Finally, when he said I had caused a rift between myself and his family, I realized something important. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting them. And in his mind, I was never his partner. I was their resource. That realization was the quiet victory of the night. As his words echoed into the dark, I thought of my mother again. She had taught me that dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it walks away. And sometimes it sits in silence while others expose themselves with every word they speak. That night, what he saw as silence was really strategy. And strategy cuts deeper than rage. The door slammed so hard the walls trembled. Daniel's footsteps thundered down the hall, and within seconds, he was in the bedroom, towering over me. His face was red, his jaw tight, and his hands balled into fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he spat. Anger like that isn't really about the event. It's about exposure. His family had seen something he never wanted them to see, that his control over me wasn't absolute. He paced back and forth, his voice rising with every step. "You humiliated me. You humiliated my family. Do you think walking out like that made you look strong? Number. It made you look pathetic. Everyone relied on you, and you let them down." The words hit like stones, but I didn't flinch. I sat there quietly, back against the headboard, watching him unravel. His fury filled the room, but I refused to give it oxygen. He wasn't angry about the money. He was angry that I had broken the unspoken contract he thought I'd signed, the one where I financed his family's comfort while erasing my own needs. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Do you know what they think of you now? They think you're selfish. They think you're vindictive. They think you did this to punish us for not helping your mom when she was sick." That last line cut sharper than all the rest. My chest tightened. He was dragging my mother's illness into this, twisting my grief, weaponizing it, turning her memory into another tool of control. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about rewriting the story, so I became the villain, the ungrateful wife, the bitter daughter clinging to money instead of family. For the first time, he was the one performing, and I was the one watching. His tirade went on and on. He accused me of being dramatic, selfish, cruel. He insisted it wouldn't have hurt me to pay for one dinner. He claimed I'd created a rift that might never heal. His voice cracked under the weight of his own fury, yet he didn't stop. And the longer he spoke, the clearer it became. He wasn't trying to make peace. He was trying to break me. Rage often disguises itself as righteousness. He wanted me to believe I was in the wrong, that I had overreacted, that I had shattered the harmony of the family. But harmony built on exploitation isn't harmony at all. It's silence under pressure. Finally, when his anger began to sputter, I lifted my eyes and met his. Calm, steady, silent. The lack of reaction unsettled him more than anything I could have said. He demanded an explanation, but I gave none. He demanded an apology, but I offered silence. And with every unanswered demand, I could see him falter, as though his power was slipping through his fingers. When someone depends on your compliance, the moment you stop complying, their entire world cracks. Eventually, he stormed out of the room, muttering curses under his breath. The door slammed again, the sound reverberating through the house. And in that quiet aftermath, I realized something vital. He hadn't been defending me to his family. He had been defending his family from me. That realization hurt more than the shouting, because it confirmed what I had feared all along. I wasn't his partner in this marriage. I was his family's financial plan. That night of rage planted a seed. He thought he had broken me down, silenced me with accusations. But in truth, he had given me clarity, and clarity is the sharpest weapon of all. I lay awake long after he left the room, fireworks still crackling faintly outside. And as I stared at the ceiling, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would never let them drain me dry. Not my account, not my dignity, not my mother's memory. What Daniel saw as humiliation was, in fact, liberation, and the story he thought ended at that restaurant. For me, it was only beginning. When the house finally fell quiet, I sat alone in the dark. My tea had gone cold on the nightstand, untouched since before Daniel returned. I could still feel the tremor of his anger in the air, like smoke that clung even after the fire had burned out. Sometimes clarity arrives in the aftermath of chaos, and in that stillness, I realized something I had been avoiding for too long. This was never about money. It was about respect. I thought back to every joke, every forgetful wallet, every subtle shift of responsibility. I had told myself it wasn't worth a fight, that keeping the peace mattered more than speaking up. But peace without respect isn't peace, it's surrender. And every time I stayed silent, I had surrendered a little more. That night, in the restaurant, I hadn't just paid for my own plate. I had bought myself a moment of freedom. Walking out wasn't a tantrum. It was a declaration. You cannot spend my grief. Money was just the surface. Underneath it was something deeper, more dangerous. They weren't just trying to take what I had inherited. They were trying to rewrite my place in the family, to reduce me to a resource instead of a person. And Daniel, he wasn't protecting me. He was managing me the way someone manages an account. Deposit my silence, withdraw my compliance, and when I finally refused, he panicked like a man watching his investments slip away. But once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And the truth was simple. Daniel's loyalty wasn't to me. It was to the system his family had built. A system where I was expected to fund their comfort while being grateful for the privilege of inclusion. As the clock ticked past 4, I thought of my mother. She had lived her life giving endlessly, always putting others first. She had believed in generosity, but also in dignity. And I remembered one thing she told me years ago when I had complained about someone taking advantage of me. If you let people treat you like a doormat, don't be surprised when they wipe their feet. Her words rang louder than Daniel's shouting ever had. And suddenly, I felt calm, steady, resolved. The inheritance was not their ticket. It was not their safety net. It was not a pool for them to drink from until it ran dry. It was my mother's parting gift, meant to protect me, to give me choices she never had. And I would not let it be twisted into something ugly. Betrayal often disguises itself as family obligation, but once the disguise falls, what remains is nothing but entitlement. And entitlement cannot survive where boundaries are firm. By the time the first light of morning crept through the curtains, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Peace. Not because the conflict was over, but because I finally understood my place in it. I wasn't the weak one. I wasn't the selfish one. I was the only one who saw the truth clearly. And that truth gave me strength. Strength to prepare, strength to resist, strength to decide, calmly and quietly, that the story wasn't finished. Because while Daniel thought I had humiliated him, he had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. Morning sunlight crept across the floor, soft and unassuming, as though the world had reset overnight. But inside me, nothing was the same. The laughter at the table, the weight of Daniel's fury, the sting of their entitlement. It all lingered, but not as wounds, as lessons. Betrayal doesn't just change how you see others, it changes how you see yourself. And in that shift, I found something unexpected. Strength. I moved through the kitchen slowly, making coffee, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Daniel was still asleep, his anger exhausted into silence. But I knew it wasn't over. Not for him, not for his family, and not for me. I thought back to every moment that had brought me here. The subtle forgetting of his wallet, the sly jokes about my inheritance, the pressure, the entitlement, the assumption that I would fund everyone else's comfort. It hadn't been one dinner. It had been a pattern. A web slowly spun around me, one that I had nearly mistaken for normal. But New Year's Eve had pulled the veil away, and when his mother made her inheritance pocket joke, when the table laughed and Daniel joined them, I had finally seen it for what it was. A collective expectation that I would surrender my dignity to their appetite. And I hadn't. Walking out wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something new. The silence they mistook for weakness was my first act of resistance. My refusal to pay for that meal was about far more than money. It was about reclaiming myself. Because the truth is this, they didn't want me. They wanted what I carried. And when I stopped giving, they showed me exactly where I stood. As I sipped my coffee that morning, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. Not because the conflict was resolved, but because I had finally seen the truth clearly. Daniel wasn't my partner. His family wasn't my family. I wasn't valued for who I was, but for what I could provide. And that realization was liberating. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's not about tearing others down, but about refusing to let them use you. My silence at the restaurant, my calm that night, my clarity in the morning, those were not endings. They were foundations. I began to imagine my next steps, protecting the inheritance, separating finances, setting boundaries Daniel couldn't cross. Each choice was a brick, moving the inheritance into a trust they couldn't touch, shifting bills back into his hands, documenting every word he threw at me. Quiet steps, invisible steps, but each one pulling me further out of his reach. Quiet choices, but powerful ones. Because the greatest revenge is not in paying them back. It's in showing them they can no longer reach you. As the first light of the new year stretched across the sky, I thought of my mother. She hadn't left me money to divide among opportunists. She had left me choices, freedom, a chance to build a life on my terms. And I owed it to her, and to myself. to protect that. So I sat there, coffee warming my hands, whispering a vow into the quiet house. They will not spend my grief. They will not define my worth. And they will not own my silence. Silence isn't surrender. It's the first draft of a plan. And that morning, mine had only just begun. They thought they had used me for the last time. They were right, just not in the way they expected.